Sure, I'd
We're
love
ready to get
to.
started.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I have the pleasure of introducing our two speakers today. So I'll start with Audra Green. Audra started her career in outdoor education and teaching youth in backcountry settings on trail crew and with the Girl Scouts, which somehow led to teaching English to incoming refugees. For years, her mom told her to become a librarian, and she finally listened. She received her MLS from IU Bloomington and is currently the outreach manager for the Meridian Library District. She seeks community connections, wilderness, opportunities for her Girl Scout troop, and climbing opportunities. And Jennifer Redford. Jennifer worked in public libraries for over 10 years before transitioning to the role of youth services consultant at the Idaho Commission for Libraries. She currently works with library staff around the state who serve families with children ages 0 to 18. Over the past year, she has worked to inform library staff about their role in strengthening families in their communities. I'll turn it over to Audra and Jennifer. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jen. And I will go ahead and get our presentation pulled up.
Jen's going to do a lot of the driving because I've also learned Chromebooks don't have all the same fun stuff that a lot of other computers have. So she'll be doing a lot of the driving.
It's fun. We love Zoom. Woo! All right, well, Audra and I are here today to discuss the role of public libraries and community partnerships in strengthening families. And we call this Books Are Just the Beginning because for a lot of libraries, that's really true. You know, when you think of libraries, you think of books. You know, I famously have heard books are our brand more times than I can count when we talk about libraries. But those of us who work in libraries know that, you know, books are just sort of a jumping off point and an access point to so much more that we can do for our community. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to try to make this a little bit interactive. So I know that your email and your phone is probably super interesting, but we will be asking for a little bit of participation, not too much though. So we will go ahead and get started. So in Idaho, libraries reach almost everyone. There is what you're seeing here on the screen is a map of our beautiful state, and all of the public libraries are represented by those blue dots. So public libraries, there's about, if you include branches of larger systems, like 180-ish public libraries in Idaho. Most Idahoans have access to a library. 16% of Idahoans don't have access to a public library. So that's about 84% of the state does have access to a public library in some way. What is not included on here are all the school and academic and special libraries that are in our state. If you count school libraries, we have around 750 school libraries. That every college and university in the state has a library. There are lots of special libraries too. When you think of like big medical centers, they have medical librarians, historical societies. So there's a type of library probably near wherever you are serving your clients or serving people in your community. Just a quick and dirty overview of how libraries are funded. Public libraries in the state are funded through taxes, either through a special taxing district or through a city tax. So if you're in the Treasure Valley, you'll notice we have a couple of different libraries. We have the Ada Community Library, which is a taxing district that serves the county of that serves Ada County. But then cities within Ada County have their own taxes too. So the Boise Public Library is funded through a city tax. And then there are other library districts within there. So it can get a little tricky when you're talking about how libraries are funded, but the main thing I want you to take away from this is libraries aren't funded by the state. They aren't funded through the federal government. They are funded at the local level throughout our state. The exception, of course, is the academic libraries, which are funded if it's a state library. Those libraries receive funding, obviously, from the state. And as we're going through the information that Audrey and I want to share with you today, we hope you'll keep in mind that libraries are one type of governmental unit, but there's also lots of other nonprofits that you could partner with that have a similar role as libraries do. So we hope that if if you're not thinking that partnering with a library is something that your organization is able to do, maybe you'll be able to learn something that will help you partner effectively with another organization. So right now I'm going to have Tessa put up a little poll for everybody, if you're ready, Tessa.
Yeah, and I would add to that what Jen was saying too, that if you are in an area that doesn't have a publicly funded library or library you can partner with, there are, especially the universities have a lot of their extension centers that are in a lot of rural areas too. So those are also a great partner with some of the stuff we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, University of Idaho has an extension center in 42 out of 44 counties in Idaho. So great resource. All right, I see your responses coming in. If you want to have time for the poll, we'll close it in 10 more seconds.
I love I can do that. What?
Yeah, you can partner with a library? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end the polling. Thanks, Tessa. So it's about an even split. Some of you do partner with a library. Some of you sometimes partner with a library. I bet you don't know about all the things you can partner on. So we're going to go into that. And then about a third of you don't partner with a library. So I hope that you'll find something useful out of what we talk about today. Okay, thanks everyone. All right. So I can sit here and tell you that people love libraries, but there's also some research that backs that up. In 2019, more people went to a library than went to a movie or attended a live sporting event combined. This is pre-COVID times, so we know times are a little different now, but libraries are going strong. People go to them. The most recent research from the Pew Center is that libraries are most used by young adults, women, and low-income households. So when you think of the folks that you're serving, if they fall in that demographic of young adults, think early 20s, just out of high school, women, low-income households, they're probably connected with their library in some way.
And a lot of that is because we're accessible. And for the most part, most library systems will always offer things for free. And I know that my library, we look a lot at the Alice report. If you're not very familiar with it, the United Way does it every 3 years in Idaho. And the Alice report focuses on those folks that fall in between what the federal government calls low income and kind of that living wage. So a lot of people who are just right on the brink. And so we look to that a lot in our community to make sure we're serving, or hopefully serving well.
And when we talk about the role that libraries play, we're going to talk a little bit about the role libraries play in social infrastructure. Research shows that people who feel more connected to others, and people who have social connections feel lower levels of anxiety and depression. And they have higher levels of self-esteem and empathy for others. They're more trusting and cooperative, and as a consequence, others are more open to trusting and cooperating with them. So having this social infrastructure can have a big impact on health outcomes for folks and just their general well-being. And libraries play a role in making sure that those social infrastructures are in place. And we know that people who don't have that sense of social infrastructure have negative health outcomes. A recent study of 20,000 people by Cigna Health Insurance found that 47% of respondents reported feeling alone or left out, and 13% said there were 0 people who knew them well. A 2010 study at BYU found that loneliness can shorten a person's life by 15 years, which is the same impact as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So when you think about the people in your community and the access they have to social infrastructure and where they're going to find socialization, the libraries can fill that gap and really help improve outcomes for folks.
And I can add to that some of the decision making that my library has done in the last few months. Where traditionally we've looked at a lot of certain things like income level and food insecurity, some of the barriers we all kind of look at. We've really started honing in on that social isolation, because that is just something that's really pervasive right now during COVID, and that's been helping inform some of our decision making as well.
And some of what we wanted to talk about today was illustrated in this really wonderful book called Palaces for the People by Eric Kleinenberg. Some of you folks who are on the call from libraries may have read it or know about it. And in that study, Eric talks about some research that he did from Chicago in 1995. So in Chicago in 1995, this big heat wave just rolled through the city. 700 people in the city died from as a result of that heat wave. And when he studied two adjacent neighborhoods that had kind of the same microclimate, the same socioeconomic demographics, lots of poorer people, lots of older folks living alone. In one neighborhood, 33 people per every 100,000 died. In an adjacent neighborhood with very similar characteristics and demographics, 3 people per every 100,000 died. And the main difference in these two neighborhoods was that one of them had social infrastructure. One of them had small commercial establishments where people could get out, meet with each other. They knew their neighbors. They knew to check on their neighbors. In the other neighborhood, there was decades of abandonment. Neighbors had transitioned a lot, so there wasn't a stable group that had been there for years and years, and people just didn't know each other, and older folks were reluctant to leave their homes. So you can see that just by having places that exist for people to socialize, it can really have an impact, in this case, on whether or not someone lives or dies. And it's not just health. In Philadelphia, there are several places that have been abandoned throughout the city, and some sites are being treated but with like lawns and benches, so they're putting mini parks in these abandoned areas. And they found that those areas that have been cared for and have these green spaces for people to come together and just kind of unwind have a 39% reduction in gun violence. Other similar areas in the city that don't have those mini parks showed a 5% reduction in gun violence over the same period of time. So really significant impact of just having a place for people to go to. In this case in Philadelphia, it was a place that was accessible to everybody and free to go to, very much like a library. So Eric Kleinenberg talks about how libraries play a role in social infrastructure. For older people, especially widows, widowers, and those who live alone, libraries are places for culture and company through book clubs, movie nights, sewing circles, classes in art, current events, and computing. For many, the library is the main place to interact with people of other generations and who may not be of your immediate social circle. To appreciate why this matters, when you compare the social space of the library with the social space of a commercial establishment like Starbucks or McDonald's, Starbucks and McDonald's, they offer free Wi-Fi, they're valuable places for social infrastructure, but not everybody can frequent them. And not everybody is welcome at all times. Whereas in the library, if we're doing it right, everyone is welcome when the doors are open. And it doesn't matter if you're paying or not. So Audrey, did you want to talk a little bit about Eleanor Ulstrom?
Yeah, my favorite. And I'll also add to kind of some of the stuff Jen said. When I'm out in the community a lot, what I really try and stress, because I hear a lot of folks, especially younger parents or those that are recently leaving prison, that they have too many fines or fees to use the library. And I really try to stress that no one's checking your card at the door. Even if you do have fines or fees, come talk to us, but also for our programs and all of those other things. I've had families with fines in the thousands. Like, nothing surprises me anymore, but they can still come to those programs. They can still feel welcome. They can still, like, no one in that room knows any of that stuff. And so I really try to stress that. And if you've ever seen me present before, especially at library conferences, a person I really look to a lot is Eleanor Ulstrom. She is, if you don't know who she is the first female to ever win a Nobel in economics, and she's also a non-economist that won a Nobel in economics. One of the things I've really appreciated about Eric Kleinenberg these last couple of years is he is kind of taking the next step of a lot of what Eleanor Ulstrom did, because her big question was, how do we measure the immeasurable stuff? And a lot of us at this conference do a lot of work that's really hard to measure the outcomes at times, or it takes really long, maybe even generational research to measure a lot of outcomes. So while Eleanor Olstrom was looking at, like, why is it important to have trees? Why is it important to have access to clean water? Why is sewage a thing that we should probably have? And then Kleinenberg kind of took it to the next level, looking at actually trying to find those measurements of what social isolation and social infrastructure can really do. So I just think it's really important sometimes for us to think about, how do we define the common good, and what are some measures that we can look at for that, whether it is libraries or whether it's the other work we do. It's that kind of common good factor.
Thanks, Audra. So now that we've sort of talked about the importance of libraries for social cohesion of communities, our question that we kind of want you to think about is, do you notice a lack of social cohesion in your community? Our times, when Audra and I started this presentation, we were going to present it in March, and the slides looked a little bit different then, and this question wasn't part of our original slide deck. But the more we thought about where we're at now and what we see on the news, we were wondering if this question was relevant. And I certainly am not equipped to do a big research study, but I would wonder if there are differences in those communities where libraries and other institutions have been able to remain open, maybe due to lack of community spread of COVID-19, and those who have been closed. So COVID-19 and the pandemic have upended typical library services around the state. So what happens when places like libraries close their doors and services and programs are offered in digital spaces? Who's left out? Who's able to come to curbside and pick up their books if your library is offering curbside delivery, and who isn't able to necessarily place a hold and pick up a book? So we're going to go into some breakout rooms right now, and if Tessa's ready for that, we will get it set up. We're going to have you broken out into rooms of about 6, and we're going to leave you for 10 minutes to talk about what you're noticing in your community in terms of social cohesion and how things are going. And if you don't want to bring libraries into that discussion, that's fine. How are things going in your community? So Tessa, if you can break us out into rooms of about 6.
Sure, and how long would you like the rooms to be open for?
We're gonna leave the rooms open for 10 minutes.
Okay.
And Audra and I can stay out here, so we'll let you talk amongst yourselves.
I thought we were going to stay out. That's why I didn't join my room.
No, I think think you have it right.
Okay, but then we lost Jen.
She'll probably hop back in here. Let's see, what room is she in? Maybe I can kick her out. No.
Yeah, one of the things that I really like to point out when people kept saying, oh, the libraries are all closing, I'm like, we're just locking our doors. We're not actually closing. Although I can only really say that for some of the libraries in this area and my library, because I do know in other parts of the country, especially in big countywide or citywide library systems, they did furlough a lot of staff and they really did just full on close.
Yeah, it really does depend. Yeah, and that makes me sad to hear. Ours, I'm in Spokane, Washington, and they're doing curbside pickup.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how many are doing that, but that's what ours are doing. But yeah, they're closed for, people can't go inside, but they are still functioning.
I'm in Meridian, which is, even though we're in a city, we are still technically an independent library district. So we don't answer to city council or the mayor or anything like that, just our board and our patrons. And our board's been really supportive. And we actually started an entire home delivery system instead. So like think Fred Meyer's or Amazon style. And part of that was because we didn't want to encourage people to come to the library to protect our staff. But also we had so many holds after being closed for 2 months, like it was just bursting at the seams. And so we converted some of our staff to delivery drivers. And that's what they do now.
Oh.
Is they drive around 7 days a week and we're able to get holds to people because my department has always done a home delivery system, but it was more for vulnerable populations, seniors or sick or...
Now it's for everybody.
Yeah, and so now we realize like that idea of what a vulnerable population is, especially with COVID, is there might be some families that have to isolate that might normally in other times have all the means in the world. And so the home delivery has really taken off. We went from like 1 staff person, I think now 5 are working on it. Yeah.
Well, that's good. That's a good way of, acclimating and kind of working around the situation, doing the best that you can. Yeah, I have a friend who was just in isolation for 28 days because he tested positive, and then right at the tail end of his coming out of it, his daughter tested positive. So then he isolated with her. So it was a whole month.
Yeah. It's tough. And with that, this is being recorded, so if anyone watches this, they'll hear our conversation. But with that, because my department in outreach, we've traditionally done a lot of things outside the library wall, so the bookmobiles and out in the community. And so we do have a lot of the higher level training. It's been interesting what publishers and authors have been very giving and which ones have not.
Yeah.
I hope y'all had good discussions.
Yeah. Do we have everybody back now? I'm going to assume so.
Yes, everyone's back.
Okay. Thanks, Tessa. That was very helpful. All right. Well, I hope that you had a good discussion, maybe had a chance to think about this idea of social cohesion and what your community is going through. And I hope that that was useful to you as we move forward. So now is the part of the presentation where we talk about how libraries can save the world, or libraries can play a huge role in helping families and communities build protective factors to mitigate the effects of adverse childhood experiences. And I'm assuming most of you were in the keynote yesterday when we talked about hope and the importance of those positive experiences. I want to talk a little bit about specific ways that libraries can help prevent child abuse and neglect, but also strengthen families through these protective factors. So when we talk about parental resilience, libraries can offer parenting classes. One of the best resources a library has is a meeting room space that people in the community can reserve and use. So if you are able to, if your agency offers parenting classes, you might think about holding them at a library when libraries are open and available for that again. Libraries can help with wellness initiatives, and they even support parental resilience by giving caregivers a chance to bond at regular story times. For a lot of first-time families, if you're a stay-at-home parent, it may be the only chance you have to talk to someone who's an adult who doesn't live in your household. So those story times can be great bonding times for the adults. It's not just for the kids. We foster social connections through many of our programs. Libraries offer so many different types of programs, from book clubs to teen programs to coffee chat type clubs. And by simply being open to everyone in the community, that really helps that social cohesion, because you're more likely to socialize with someone who you wouldn't necessarily know. One of my favorites is when libraries offer coloring programs for adults. So they just have coloring sheets out and really fancy colored pencils and let people just come in and color for a little while, which can be relaxing, but also a chance to just unwind and chat with people who similarly like to color. So knowledge of parenting and child development is another protective factor that libraries actually play a big role in, because we offer resources on parenting and child development. We have lots of books that if you know a good book that was written, you will probably find it in your library. I have 2 checked out from my library right now to help me with my 2-year-old and my 4-year-old. But just having access to those books and resources is really important. Not everybody can afford books. So having them available to check out for free at the library is a wonderful resource. Concrete support in times of need. So if you move to a new area, if you're experiencing homelessness, your library may be your only access to high-speed internet, which is crucial for applying for jobs, applying for unemployment, applying for Social Security. So many things rely on internet right now. For many communities in Idaho, the library is the only source of high-speed broadband. And our agency is working to improve that even as we speak. We have over $2 million in grants that we are giving out to very rural libraries in Idaho to improve their broadband capabilities over the next few months. Libraries also circulate hotspots. So for families who don't have enough access to internet right now, if their children are learning online, they may be able to get help from that at the library. Also, libraries exist to give people information and resources. So if you're experiencing a traumatic event, or you don't know where to go to find the nearest source for food, for low-cost clothing, your library probably has a list of resources and can direct you to the right spot. So it can provide some very important information in a timely manner. And then another protective factor is the social and emotional competence of children. And many libraries, most libraries provide story time. Those story times are great chances for kids to learn important self-regulation skills, how to sit and listen quietly, how to participate, how to cooperate with others when they're doing different activities. There's a lot of different programs that libraries offer that are aimed at children, and many of them, while they may not say explicitly that they will help your child develop important social and emotional learning skills, they all do it in some way. It's sort of a benefit of every program that a library offers.
My turn, right? Couldn't find my cursor. I want to add some of this stuff to what Jen said too, with some of the parenting classes. So I teach parenting classes in the, well, pre-COVID, in the Ada County Jail. And when we first, when I was getting my presentation approved by their staff, I thought I was just going to be in the female side because it was a lot of like early literacy and like how to read books and play with your kids. And she was like, oh no, you're doing this on the men's side too. And I have had some of the best conversations on both sides. And I've also never really given presentations where like 80 people are in the room, but that's how many are in a pod in the Ada County Jail or in each pod. And so it's some of those best things, just trying to empower them with a lot of free stuff. I wanted to point out my very first Strengthening Families conference that I went to quite a few years ago. I realized that a lot of the work, a lot of the different agencies and libraries were doing, we're all doing a lot of similar stuff. We're just using different terminology. Like a lot of the terminology that's in Strengthening Families was new to me. And I was like, oh, but we're actually already doing a whole lot of this stuff. So it's been a really fun journey these past few years to start making some of those connections with different terminology and different organizations, and recognizing that we are working on some of the same stuff. So here's I just have some pictures here of some of the things that we've been doing that play off some of the stuff Jen just talked about. So that top picture is, we use pool noodles as our barrier there. This is post-COVID or during COVID. That's our sprinter. We actually have 2 bookmobiles at my library. And we got to a point where we used to have a lot of bookmobile stops, but we kind of triaged during COVID to be like, all right, some of them are just convenience stops. Those folks have transportation. We also have a whole home delivery system where we're literally dropping people's holds at their door. But we recognize that transportation and other factors are a big barrier at some of our apartment complexes. So those were the only bookmobile stops that we are currently doing. We're also not publicly advertising them because we want to really focus on those families. So we started bringing materials in, and we are actually starting next week converting those stops to being even longer, and we're being homework help because as of 2 nights ago, West Ada has decided to go all virtual. So we're going to bring a mobile printer and basically do homework help at the sites, because that's what we're hearing a lot from families is they just don't know how they're going to do this when they're, I mean, we were already pre-COVID, these kids were coming to us with their parents' phone and a Google Doc and trying to figure out how to do papers. And so now we know it's an even bigger deal. That second picture down there, we were fortunate. So the past few years, I think we were in our 4th year, we got some money from various service organizations like Kiwanis, Lions, those type of service organizations, to do a mailing program for kids that were like Head Start kids and kids in the developmental preschool. So they got 6 books over the course of the summer. And what kid doesn't love to get mail? It's awesome. What we were fortunate this April, when we were like, how are we going to do summer reading? We already had the infrastructure, and we converted our entire summer reading program to mailing. So we did focus on mainly just kids, so early learning and school age. And they got a book in the beginning and a book in the end, and we mailed it to them. And we've been getting, it's also one of those like data points. As much as I want to just always keep doing good service, you get grants with data, you get grants with the stories. And so by having self-addressed stamped envelopes with a lot of our mailing, families mailed back a lot of data and stories that we're able to now use for a lot of other things too. Plus it just made us feel like really good and awesome. Let's see, I think I'm also the next slide too. So if you could move forward. Yeah, thank you. So I kind of joked back in the spring when we were like, all the libraries are closing. And I'm like, well, right now we're actually just physically closing our doors. We're not actually closing. We were fortunate to still be able to doing a lot of services. I know statewide and nationwide, there were some library systems that did fully close and furlough people. So we were able to keep going. We also know, like, the big elephant in the room with COVID a lot right now is childcare. They were trying to get people back to work, nowhere to put their kids. And a lot of our places like Boys and Girls Clubs and the Ys have had to half their enrollment. But what we did is my team did really awesome. We kind of got into action where a couple of stuff we did is we did do some virtual story times with our childcare centers, developmental preschool, and Head Start. And we also learned with copyright that if it's on their private YouTube channel and not actually out in the public, we could kind of avoid some of that. We also knew that a lot of the families we worked with, internet is a barrier. And getting to our website, getting into virtual programs is just more steps for a family to have to deal with. But by us sending a direct link to the teachers they'd already built relationships with, or the centers they already built relationships with, and those center staff sending it out to families, then we were able to hit a lot of kids that may not have been able to get into our, on our own online resources. We also, there's some of the pictures in here. The one that's my garage and a big pile of books. One of the programs we are fortunate to get through the commission, where Jen works, is a program called First Books. And the idea is that kids, we do 9 story times over the course of the year, and kids get to take those books home. Well, in March, a lot of the schools closed. And also the library was sort of closed, and we were limiting staff in the building. So that's me trying to get all the books prepped. So we were still able to get books to the sites, and the sites helped us get them to the kids. So even though they were losing some of that engagement with libraries, the common goal was still there, building that kids' home library. We also worked with our summer sites that we normally would have been doing programs in summer reading at, and we created summer reading in a box with instructions so the center staff could do it. And we created programs in a box, where we took a lot of our supplies, especially stuff that we knew was going to go bad in our garage anyway, built all these different programs. And I know we gave out 24, I was just doing the numbers this week, 24 different programs in a box to our sites. And we gave out this summer through the mailing programs almost 4,000 books that these kids don't have to give back. So these are books that they get to keep and share and go forward. And that's just a quote from one of the unit coordinators at the Boys and Girls Club. In Meridian, we have 3 different sites that we work with. But she's saying, we've been using the programs in a box, and they've been very impressed with the library's capacity to keep staff safe, but also still operate. And we also recognize that it's really tough for staff and agencies right now. And so that was I'm really glad she shared that with me, that by us being able to provide something that their staff didn't have to plan for, took one less thing kind of off their shoulders as well. So we were able to do that. And what we really did is we focused on our most vulnerable populations, which I know is a very loose term. My library is actually trying to define what the word vulnerable means right now. But that's really where we took all of our energy, and we were like, all right, who do we know is not going to get access to the library? Who do we know could be struggling? And how do we make sure that we still provide either the staff or the families some type of service this year? Next slide, please. And I should actually look and see if, just making sure there are no questions in the chat box. Feel free to, Jen or Tessa or someone, yell at me if I miss a question. In the chat box. So I want to talk about partnerships. One thing that I've learned with a lot of, especially the folks on my teams, we've got 4 teams right now that I'm working with at the library, is we do a lot of partnerships, and we provide a lot of service, and we want to provide a lot of service, but we also don't want to also just be providing something that is not always mutually beneficial. So what's really important in a partnership is finding that mutually beneficial thing and having that conversation about what each party is responsible for. So sometimes an example is like the developmental preschool. The bigger goal is early learning. So maybe that school, what the school's providing is access to those kids, and we're providing all the actual story times and books and those things. So it could be a very simple mutually beneficial thing, just like access to the families or access to being able to send out newsletters to the families because they've built that relationship with their teachers or their social workers or whoever. And then some of the partnerships are much heavier and bigger and require lots of contracts and MOUs and all sorts of fun things. What we've found too is that the library can be a place that folks trust because they might have had a negative experience in their school or in with a police officer or with a social worker. I mean, everyone's doing their best. That's not to discount any of the agencies, but every family is a very different situation. Even in the session I was in this morning, someone shared that they had a lot of high need kids, and so they were choosing to homeschool because the school couldn't keep up with what they really needed. And it's not the school's fault, it's that the school doesn't have the resources to actually do a lot of what they need to do. And so that's where at the library, we will sometimes get a lot of that. They've built some type of relationship with us, or maybe it's because they don't know us yet, and so they're just willing to like share their entire story. Sometimes when someone just needs a printer, I hear the entire divorce story first before I realize all they really need to do is print something, which is fine. We're there to be an ear and to figure out what is something that we can do as a library to serve this community. We, trigger warning here, you know, we've had in the library definitely some domestic violence cases and people coming and sharing information, as well as suicide notes. We had a parent, she basically sent her 4-year-old kid to the desk to ask us for help. We were like, oh, she needs computer help. That was like our reaction. And really she needed, she was gonna harm herself and she was trying to do the right thing, but the hospital had already turned her away, the school had already turned her away, like she just kind of felt like there was nowhere else to go. So, so those are the things that we kind of come across, and we don't always have the best training. We're not really social workers, we're not really teachers, but we rely heavily on so many of the other agencies that are like even here at this conference to call. Like the suicide hotline has been very beneficial. They're not just for folks who might be contemplating suicide, they can also help family members and staff find the right terminology and get the right help too in those situations. And that's where that kind of resilience and a lot of different things come in. And let's see, I'm one slide behind. Go one slide behind, I think. I'm off a little, sorry. Nope, other way.
Oh.
It's okay. I can't remember if I showed those pictures. Oh, I did show those pictures. I'm sorry, go back ahead. That's my fault. So some of our partnerships here, I'll point out. So that shipping container is a tiny library. That is where we couldn't pass a bond in South Meridian. Meridian right now, we're able to build some branches now because we finally passed a levy. But I know much more about tax law than I ever thought I would. And in order to pass a bond in Idaho for an independent district, it needs a supermajority of 66%, and we kept getting 59%. But we had committed to being partners at a South location that was with the YMCA and the school district and Parks and Rec and St. Luke's. So we still wanted to do something. So we basically found that common shared goal, what do we really want to focus on here, and parents and early learning. So we got a grant through the city, the Solid Waste Advisory Council, because there's a committee for that. And they were able to help us buy a shipping container. And I'm a little sad because it's supposed to be like a very interactive program of space. It's meant for 0 to 5-year-olds, and COVID has kind of taken away all the amazing stuff in Tiny right now because we can't really have a lot of touch items. But the collection in there is all aimed at supporting parents, supporting caregivers, and 0 to 5-year-olds. So we've got that collection there. That's the ribbon cutting down there. The other picture, that is Unbound. That's our technology library. At Meridian, we tend to do like special libraries, I guess is what we call them. Unbound, technology is a big need. We don't have enough space in a lot of our locations. Word of mouth, the Meridian Development Corporation rented us a bank for $1 a month. So that's where we created our technology library right in downtown. So it's more like a startup place for like small businesses. Like they don't really have that many books in it. It's a meeting place. It's got high level technology that has now been torn down. But during that time, we were able to prove why it was of value. And we are currently, it's supposed to open sometime between October and December, but we actually are building an entirely new space now for Unbound. So it'll be much bigger and it'll actually be our building. And we're able to provide a lot more services in that. But that's that partnership piece of finding the common shared goal. So in that case, it was with Meridian Development Corporation on the desire for the small businesses to want to do something. And but we've also found that a lot of families are still coming in there, which is great. And a lot of like troops and some schools are coming in there to learn a lot of this stuff as well. Let's see. Next.
So, Audra, do you want to talk a little bit about what this slide says, which is basically the nuts and bolts about how you get a partnership going with a library?
Yeah. I feel like there's a slide that we missed that's in mine and not yours. that has like trunk or treat on it and stuff, but that's fine. So yeah, so how does the magic happen? So finding partners with those shared goals. This is has also been a good talking point for some of the staff that I work with and even my own self to get over barriers, especially if we are working with, say, like the prison, which does a lot of censorship of their materials and books, which is really against what a lot of libraries do, or certain religious organizations. And so staying focused on that common shared goal can really help us decide like what is the point and purpose. Like an example I had with that is I had, there's a really big church in Meridian that came to me and wanted to do a storytime training because they were going to work with refugees. And my concern was, are you proselytizing? And they're like, no, we actually specifically, they were coming to me to ask for help in how not to do that so that they could serve the refugee community in a very accessible way. So not all the goals have to align. It's finding that the shared one, and that can also really help with some of those hard conversations, is staying really aligned with a goal. And some of these things are sometimes by accident. I have a note there that says embedded librarianship. One of the things we do in Meridian is every manager is on some different board, whether it's arts or like I'm on Kiwanis, someone else is on Lion, someone else is on Sir Optimist. Because these are a lot of agencies that are business people that have money and they want to support the community. They don't really know what to do with that. And so by us being in that room, we can bring up opportunities. By me going to Kiwanis is how we got our first funding for mailing books to kids, because postage was the biggest barrier to that. We could get books, but postage is really expensive. Same thing with, we were circulating bikes for a few years out of our library, and it's the same thing. I was just talking about, wouldn't this be cool one day? And then the Mayor's Youth Advisory Council was like, we are going to give you a bunch of money for this. And I was like, oh, I didn't ask for it, but cool, thanks. But we also want to protect ourselves as an organization and protect kind of what we're doing. That's where I have a note here that says MOUs. It's mutual, what's that actually stand for? Operation Understanding, something like that. It's kind of like when a contract is like
it's a memorandum of understanding.
Thank you. I'm so used to saying the word MOU that I've forgotten what it actually says.
And then there's also an MOA, memorandum of agreement.
Oh, that's good to know. But it's kind of when a contract is too much, but a handshake's not enough. We first started with MOUs at my library, just with some of the senior centers we go to, just like a basic conversation that says, hey, if you lose the stuff, you'll probably have to pay for it. And I've been there almost 7 years now, and I've only had to have a hard conversation once, ever. Because really, I think what's important with this is when you have the conversation, then people know what the expectations are, and you can avoid a lot of messy things down the road. So defining those goals and outcomes, are you measuring outcomes? Are you able to measure outcomes? Determining who does what, and also remembering that it's kind of a mutually beneficial relationship. And what's been really important too is having like an assessment date and a date to reevaluate. Some of ours are pretty simple. It's really just a matter of like, there's a lot of turnover in the childcare centers. And so every time we reevaluate our childcare agreements, we're like, oh, there's a bunch of new staff. And we get a chance to meet with them. And some are much bigger and heavier, like the really big one that we have that's with St. Luke's and the Y and West Ada School District and Parks and Rec. That's one that we have to like, that's actually more than an MOU. That one's a really big document. But what's great is pretty much everyone at the table are still finding that common shared goal. There's what type of language supports can the libraries offer in partnerships? Do you mean like translation? Is that what? That type, or do you mean?
Yeah, so translation and interpretation.
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And that's actually been an interesting benefit of having virtual story times is the teams, they learned closed captioning real fast on that. And I'm actually working with the IEYEC. We're trying to figure out how to get that into, overlaid into multiple languages right now. So previous to COVID, though, we did offer some bilingual story times in some of our sites, as well as we partnered with the Idaho School for Deaf and Blind to do some ASL interpretation. And we also have an ASL practice class that happens, and we're still able to do that online. They're using Zoom in our library right now to still have that. We have an English language learner one for people to just practice conversation, as well as an ASL practice one. And that's where I encourage staff to also really listen to what parents are saying or caregivers are saying, because that's sometimes the only way we know where we might be dropping the ball on something and what a family needs. So a lot of stuff is translated into Spanish in Idaho, but what we've found through West Ada schools, in particular to Meridian, is Russian, Arabic, and Spanish are the 3 primary languages. So working with different entities to help get those things translated in that way as well. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but that's been actually a perk of virtual programs, is we're translating all of our kindergarten all-stars into multiple languages and closed captioning. Right, kindergarten all-stars is a kindergarten readiness program. So,
and so a lot of these programs that Audra is talking about can help both the partner and the library extend programs, offer additional services. It sort of amplifies what everybody is doing. But we're going to talk about how there's another model where you can actually co-locate services at the library. So I know Jax is on this call. So hey, Jax, how's it going?
Oh, can you step back one more slide? I forgot to show the bottom.
Sorry,
it's okay. So it looks really like uncool down there at the bottom, but I do have a rubric for partnerships, and questions we kind of ask are, what access is it giving? Does it fit with our strategic plan? What's the level of impact? Does it fit with our brand? Do we even have the capacity as a library to do it? Does the partner have capacity to do it? And that's kind of what helps steer a lot of our conversations with partners as well.
All right.
Thanks.
Now we'll talk about co-location. So that's when you're able to actually locate your physical services and offices next to the library, where a lot of the people that you serve may also be able to use the library resources. So Step Ahead Idaho is a nonprofit that helps kids apply and get into college, and they help with everything from SAT prep to college essays to filling out financial aid forms, all for free. It's a really wonderful service. For years, they were located in like a closet of the basement of the YMCA downtown, but they were able to raise some funds and relocate to a space that is adjacent and somewhat connected to the Hillcrest branch of Boise Public Library, which is up on the bench, which is sort of more central to the folks that would need their services. The library and this organization share a conference room that can be it's modular, so you can like open up part of it and close part of it. They have a door into the library. There's some separate facilities. They share Wi-Fi. Jack says that Step Ahead isn't all free, but they are providing a community service, and they are located basically like adjacent to the library. So it's sort of a one-stop shop for everyone. And then Audra, did you want to talk about Bookmobile and Parks and Rec?
Sure. So we've, to add to that, some of the other co-location services we've done is we had Terry Riley, if you're familiar with that organization, they're medical, but we had a social worker in the library. And pre-COVID, the Department of Labor in Idaho closed a big chunk of their offices all across the state, including Meridian. So we were hosting Department of Labor office hours as well in our library. And the Bookmobile, that's my big bus right there. And not the Sprinter van, but yeah, so we, Boys and Girls Club, Parks and Rec, and a lot of city events, we've been able to co-locate at a lot of things. One of our partnership, I'm glad Jax brought up that not everything is free at Step Ahead. One of the things that Meridian, that is part of our partnership rubric, is will it be free and accessible to the patrons? And while not everything is, we instead will try to either find a grant or use our own program money to where we pay for the service so that everyone has access when they come into whatever it is. So that, yeah, is a picture. That particular picture, I believe, is Unplug and Get Outside, where we had our bikes for circulation, but it was a Meridian Parks and Rec event. And that's also an opportunity by us all being there. We reach a lot of families that had no idea that the library still did a lot of things. And so we're able to see a segment of the population that may not have been relying on us. And it's also always just super fun when we get to drive the bus up onto sidewalks and parks, which is the fun part of it, the job. So yeah, so a lot of co-location. We also partner with the community schools. And if you're familiar with the community schools concept that United Way is doing around the state of Idaho, it's also a national concept. We do a lot of classes at the community schools, and that's one of the driving forces behind the community schools is they have a community relations staff person that brings in the food bank backpacks, brings in the library services, brings in computers and social workers so that families don't have to bounce from here to here to here to here just to basically survive. Trying to get all of those services into one place to kind of increase that access and decrease a lot of barriers that families face.
And then I think Audra talked a little bit about her rubric here. Here is a more in-depth look at the rubric.
It's a real big, gigantic, messy document. So I just did a couple of screenshots here that are not very pretty. But we really got into the nuts and bolts a few years ago to figure out how are we providing service, who are we providing it to, are we providing it to the right people? Because we realized a lot of agencies and schools that have capacity to contact us were contacting us, and maybe some that really actually needed us more weren't. So what we've done is I kind of put a little list on the side is some of the tabs on our rubric are we assess, and we assess this every single year because communities shift and change. Elementary schools, middle and high schools, childcare centers, home delivery, the senior facilities and programs, things that we consider. We look at housing insecurity, we look at food insecurity, transportation, language barriers, and where this rubric has really helped us, and side note, I never thought I'd be a numbers person, like ever. So this is a really big challenge for me. Unfortunately, I had a lot of staff that were like, could take my big weird idea and they actually were able to make it into numbers. But it's given us the language also that when a new agency or new site contacts us, we can ask them immediately, like, what is your ELL population? Do you have identified homeless families or housing insecure families in your organization? Do you have a percentage of ICCP, which if you don't know what that is, that's a health and welfare childcare subsidy program for families. For senior centers, do you have a certain percentage that are Medicaid and Medicare beds? So it gives us that language to not only determine where we should put our energy as staff, because we don't have all the energy in the world, but it also allows that conversation with a partner to offer up a lot more information without really getting into a lot of privacy stuff as well. And we're able to find the best fit for them. One example is I often get a question of like, can you bring the Bookmobile to this thing? Because everyone loves the Bookmobile, it's adorable. But we realize what they really need is not the Bookmobile. They need a completely different type of service we can offer, but they didn't know that we can offer that. So these rubrics have really helped us hone in on not only what we can do, both staffing capacity wise and also services we offer, but it's also a way for us to constantly assess our community. Every year we do the schools, every year we do the childcare centers, every year we do the senior centers. And so we can see like if one school suddenly has a shift in population for language, or another school has a shift in, like they lost their free and reduced lunch because for whatever reason, you know, so it's a way for us to really keep a gauge on our communities as well. And it's also that language helps us find partners to work with as well, so that we're not all duplicating a bunch of resources, so that we can actually work together with the same population too. Sure, okay. Now it's y'all's turn. Oh, you're still on mute.
Thanks, Audra. So we wanted to give everybody a chance to think about how they might plan a a partnership with a library. So I'm going to put a link to a Google Doc in the chat. This Google Doc is view only, so you won't be able to go in and edit it, so you'll have to make a copy for yourself. And then I'm going to share that doc really quickly so we can look at it together. So we call this the Library Partnership Worksheet, and it's just a really simple form that can help you get started on some of this. Audra went really in depth about her rubric, but before you get there, you need to sort of identify those higher level goals that we talked about earlier. So the first step is to identify libraries in your community that could be potential partners. And the logical thing to do is think about your public library. You're probably, hopefully all of you use your public library and are familiar with it. However, school libraries do a lot of community outreach. They play a significant role in that out of school learning time that is so important for families. College libraries are more and more involved in their communities. Just about every college library I know does some sort of outreach event. Even if it's just for students, you might serve folks who are families and students. So they might have more access to their college library than their public library. So just a chance for you to brainstorm what libraries you would work with. And then what types of programs and services do you have in common that it would make sense to partner on? And that now that we are in the age of COVID, this can be a lot of different things. Going virtual in some ways has opened up access for some folks, but it also is not accessible for other folks. So keep that in mind. Who is your audience? Who are you trying to serve? How do they plug into the library that you want to work with? And then make a plan. And this is sometimes the biggest barrier, is finding out who to contact and then figuring out how will you communicate with that person? What questions do you have? What information do you want to share? It's always good to have a conversation about the missions of your organization and sort of the overall goals. Sometimes you'll find out that you have more services and programs in common than you thought, or you might find out that there's a really big hurdle that you need to figure out how to overcome. Audrey, did you have anything to add about that?
No, yeah. And if you don't have libraries in your area, just think of other things too. That's about, yeah. Sorry, I got distracted. People were asking me questions privately in the chat.
So we have a very limited time for questions before we need to wrap things up, but Audra and I are here to answer your questions on partnerships, libraries, all of it. If you have specific questions about some of the programs that Audra's library offers, or you want to know more about what the Idaho Commission for Libraries does, now's your time.
And if the team allows, I can stay on a little bit too.
Yeah. And I know we have library folks on the call too, so if you work in a library and you have anything that you'd like to add, we'd love to hear your voice as well. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so we can see each other's faces. Okay.
I think I thought we had till 12:15. That was my fault. I kept talking.
There's so much to say. Libraries are really exciting, and Audra and I can't stop talking about them, as you can probably tell. We're really enthusiastic about everything that libraries are doing. I'm just inspired every day by what libraries around the state have been able to accomplish in the time of COVID. They're just knocking it out of the park in terms of stepping up their game with services, really being thoughtful about how to protect their communities and stay safe, make sure everybody has all the PPE they need, hopefully, and just reimagining how to serve families in a way that makes sense right now.
Yep. Oh, and our emails are on the very first slide, which will also be shared on the Padlet when I download it and send it to Taryn.
Don't forget to fill out the evaluation, also on the Padlet.
We have a whole couple of resource slides too if you want to dive deeper into any of those statistics. I mean, Personally, I could read Pew Reports all day. They're very exciting.
And also, if
maybe
you can't read all of Eric Kleinenberg's book, I linked quite a few podcasts where he's just interviewed. And so you can do that on your walks.
Okay, going. Last chance for questions. Okay, take it away, Jen.
All right, so thank you both so much, Jennifer and Audra, for all the exciting and impactful information that you shared. It's great to hear about all of the resources and opportunities that are available through our libraries. And then I just wanted to put in a plug for a friendly reminder for everyone to do their evaluations that you can find on the Padlet. Thank you.